tomorrow we're going to do a game that you have to move. Mostly because my 8 a.m. class is very sluggish. They need to do something. Okay, so like I said, it's just a little game to review the syllabus. So don't freak out.
Oh, is it going? What's that thing?
I should have explained.
Okay, I got it.
Good morning, we're playing Kahoot. Yeah, so your textbook is just another resource for you guys to use. All of your quizzes in this class are open book, open notes. So you might as well go ahead and get the textbook. That way, if there's a question or something on the quiz in the future, you should be able to go to that index and find it. Yeah.
I have a PDF of it online, if that works.
That's right. It's fine.
Okay.
Because there's like a lockdown browser that a lot of professors use so that you can't use like other windows open on your quiz at the same time. But because I have a whole bunch of early college high school students that use Chromebooks, that lockdown browser isn't compatible with Chromebooks yet. So I can't use it on my quizzes. So you benefit. You benefit from something I can't do. So I'll just trust you guys. Yeah, oh my gosh. You guys did so good. My last class missed this one. The primary colors are red, blue, and yellow. Yeah. Technically, black and white are not considered true colors or hues in the art world, which is what a lot of them answered in the last class. So good job.
Is the ID somewhere?
It's right down here. It's 93. Ooh, you can't see it on your screen. 9368 184. I'm like, I always forget that that screen cuts off the bottom. Yeah, so there is an art gallery on campus that's located in the Allison Fine Arts Building. We just put up a new show yesterday. I say we, but I don't actually do it. Yeah, there's a new show up. It's actually really, really interesting. It's all drawings, which is quite a bit different for us, but it's not your normal drawings. Definitely a lot to read as far as symbolism in them if you want to go visit. But I like to point out there is an art gallery on campus because you do have a gallery report later on this semester that requires you to go to an art gallery in person. And why not use the one that's here and free and open from 8 a.m. till 10 p.m. every day? Because it's here. Of course, you can use others as well, but I like to remind people that there is one available. Yeah, you were there. That was a trick question. Yeah, it's with an F. That was just mean.
What?
8 a.m. to 8 p.m. It's almost all the time. And I only put that in there because I had one student last semester who once a week texted me at 3 a.m.
Oh my God.
I am asleep then. So I had to, for the first time ever, specify hours. 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Yeah, basically, when a normal person receives text messages or calls, you can probably call or text me, but not 3 a.m. She would text me at 3 a.m. to tell me she wasn't going to make it to class at 9:30. I had some strange people last semester. I had to make a whole bunch of new rules because of them. Good, yeah. As long as you come to class, do the assignments, do them on time, you should be able to pass. Actually, you will pass if you do those 3 things. Will you get an A? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know, but you will pass. We're going to be talking about this one today. Yeah, a lot of people assume that this was actually made to be a mosque because of the 4 towers that surround it. Those towers are called minarets, and they're usually used to denote cardinal directions in the Muslim faith. They're supposed to pray facing Mecca, so they need to know which direction Mecca is. But they were added on to a tomb for whatever reason. So the ruler of the Mughal Empire, a long, long time ago, named Shah Jahan, had a favorite wife who happened to die in childbirth. So he decided to build paradise for her body to reside in after her death. So the Taj Mahal is actually supposed to exemplify paradise, and her body is buried inside of it. He later on was also buried there. So it's actually a tomb, and we're going to be talking about that today because it's going to fall under one of our 6 categories that are on the board. Kind of preaching to the choir on this one because there are 2 people absent today. But you should probably attend class regularly. 1, because attendance is factored into your grade. 2, because we cover material that's going to be on quizzes and assignments later on, and if you miss it, you're going to probably miss stuff.
If we have to go to the online one, does it show that we're there?
Yeah, yeah. So if you're curious what it looks like, I get notified. Well, actually, instead of seeing my face on the screen, I would see yours or your little icon thing. So I will know you're here. It lets me know when someone gets in.
Okay.
So you would still be counted perfect. Here's another tricky one. Statue of David was made by Michelangelo during the Renaissance era, which came a long, long time after the Greeks. Every single day. I have office hours every single day. One of my office hours that's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday is right after this class too. So if you ever need a tutorial session, there is a whole hour right after this class that you can take advantage of. There's also virtual office hours on Monday and Wednesday from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m., as well as on Friday from 8 till noon. So if you ever need help with something or you need help doing an assignment or going through a paper, don't hesitate to reach out. I will gladly take the time to help you do those things, okay? And last question. Nobody should miss it. I hope, unless you're joking. Yeah. So it's actually pretty easy to pass pretty much any class on this campus. You should come do the assignments and do them on time and you should be fine. Will that guarantee a good grade? No, but it'll guarantee a passing grade, at least in my class. Let's see who won. Angel, good job. Awesome. Okay. An emergency test alert happening at 10 a.m. Okay. Good to know. In the middle of our class. So yesterday we started talking about what is art and what is creativity, and we started introducing some terms that we didn't quite finish. So what we're going to do to start off our lecture today is to go over our very last vocabulary word from chapter 1, and then we will go into chapter 2, which is all about the purposes and functions of art. So our last vocabulary for that first chapter is iconography, and I'm actually going to be talking about a particular artwork today that uses iconography, actually a couple of them. Iconography, another word for that would be symbolism. It's the idea of using symbols or motifs that are easily recognizable, that tend to have some sort of meaning behind them, such as a mother and child being representative of Mary and Jesus in Renaissance art. Not all artworks contain iconography, so if you were trying to write a summary of an artwork and you're like, I can't find the iconography, there might not be any. So what we're going to do next is look at some artworks with iconography in it and see if we can figure out what each of them are, or at least what they represent, or who they represent. We're going to start off a little harder and then we'll end with a fun one. We're going to start off in the Renaissance era. The Renaissance era, almost all of the art produced had some sort of iconography in it. During that particular time period, the church was the main patron of the arts, meaning they were the ones that paid for most of the art. That being said, it means most of the art was religious. So there's a lot of religious iconography in Renaissance art. The first one we're going to look at is Raphael's The Madonna of the Meadow. Let's see if we can figure out who these people are supposed to represent, because all three of the people in this picture are an example of iconography. Once again, we're talking about a Christian religion from the Renaissance period. That should help you figure out who's who. I'll probably have to help you with the last one a little bit, but that's okay. Who do you think this lady is? She's the mom in Christian religion. Mary, yeah. A lot of times, almost all the time in Renaissance art, Mary will be shown wearing a blue cloak of some sort, or a blue piece of fabric, making her really easily recognizable to literally anyone that was going to see that painting. And let's see if we can figure out who this one is. Jesus, yeah, her kid. So that one right there is Jesus. Usually If it is a plain naked baby that is really close to Mary, it's probably going to be Jesus. The last baby is the hardest one, because you would have to be really familiar with Bible knowledge as well as a little bit with iconography. But in the Bible, there is a very famous man who is often known for wearing animal skins. Yeah. So this is John the Baptist, Jesus' cousin. So almost always in this religious iconography setting, John the Baptist will be wearing some sort of an animal skin. Of course, this is a pretty easy one. Later on, we're going to look at, in the semester, we're going to look at Michelangelo's Last Judgment, which is chock full of iconography, but you have to know a whole lot about saints in order to pick those guys out. Our next one, this one's pretty easy. It's pretty much the same as the last one. Who's the lady in the blue? Mary. Who's the kid with the cross and animal skin? John the Baptist. Who's the naked baby here? And who's the lady with the wings? An angel, yeah. See? We could probably pick out the angel without knowing anything, because those haven't really changed too much throughout the years. Now we're going to move into the fun territory. What's this? Campbell's soup can. This is an art print made by Andy Warhol, one of his famous Campbell soup cans. He chose to use a lot of easily recognizable images in order to appeal to the masses and make art a little bit more easily digestible by the masses. This is just one such example. Here's another Andy Warhol. Who knows who that lady is? Marilyn Monroe. Sometimes Madonna looks like that. Yeah, so that's Marilyn Monroe. We weren't alive, I don't think any of us probably, to see Marilyn Monroe while she was still alive, but we all still know who she is. She's an icon, and this is a great example of iconography. She's very, very easily recognizable even today. And that is it for iconography in chapter 1. Now we're going to segue and build on our foundations of what art is by talking about the purposes and functions of art. There are 6 categories for the purposes and functions of art, and those 6 categories are listed on the screen, well, up on the board. They'll be on the screen in a second. But as far as purposes, sometimes the purposes are goal-oriented as far as the artist. Sometimes it's personal purpose. Sometimes the artist isn't really connected to the purpose at all. It just depends on what category we're talking about, as well as the time period of art history. Yeah, there's 6 functions. Sometimes art can fall under more than one category. We'll be looking at some examples of those throughout the class today. But how this is going to work today is we're going to be going one by one through each category, talking about what that category is all about, and then going through different examples of artworks that would fall under that category. And like I said, there are 6. The first category, and where we're going to start off with, is art for delight, art for delight, or art as delight. Art is commentary, art in worship, art for commemoration, art for persuasion, and art as self-expression. So yesterday might have seemed a little daunting as far as all of an introduction or new things. Today is a lot easier because most of these are pretty common sense. For example, something that would fall under the art as persuasion category would be an advertisement, because it's trying to persuade you to buy something. These are pretty easy to get. Like I said, we're going to start with art for delight. Art for delight can be translated or summarized as, I like to look at it. So art that people like to look at, art that's made to be aesthetically pleasing to look at. And aesthetics is one of our vocabulary words for today. Aesthetics is just the awareness of beauty. Of course, everyone has a different idea on what beauty is, on what things are beautiful, on what things are aesthetically pleasing. Something that I think is aesthetically pleasing, Sam or Angel might not think is aesthetically pleasing. We will all be looking and seeing things differently. We all have different standards of beauty. Standards of beauty or aesthetic value can change from culture to culture, person to person, and time period to time period, depending on different trends. So a great example of that would be comparing the idea of beauty that was exemplified by the Greeks to the idea of beauty today. It's going to be quite a bit different because there's a very large time period in between, as well as a lot of different cultural trends happening. Sometimes I really want to do like just a note-taking class on how to take notes. Maybe one of these. So this particular statue was made in the high classical period of ancient Greece. It was made during a time period in which artists were trying to show what they felt the ideal male and female body looked like. For the ancient Greeks, it was thought that humans descended from the gods, therefore humans were a personification of the gods and goddesses. So they wanted to showcase the beauty of the gods and goddesses. There was even an artist named Polyclitus who set about the task of studying the human body and figuring out the ideal measurements of the male form, and he wrote an entire book about it. So these people were very much obsessed with aesthetic beauty and idealism. But once again, aesthetics change from person to person and time period to time period and culture to culture. So the ancient Greeks felt this discobolus thrower or discus thrower was the ideal male form, but today we might not agree with that. So it's important to keep in mind as we go through this particular section of art as delight or art for delight, that something I like, you might not like, or something you like, I might not like. We're going to see examples of both. Another example of a time period in art that was very much interested in the ideal human form was the Renaissance era. The Renaissance era was all about a rebirth of the Greek and Roman ideas, which included their sculptures. And here is Botticelli's take on what an ideal female form would look like in the birth of Venus. We're going to talk quite a bit later on about this particular painting when we get to the Renaissance era and all of the iconography that exists within it as well. I forgot to mention yesterday, I should really once again, last semester, someone was extremely offended because there's a lot of nudity. So here's your disclaimer. In art, there's a lot of naked people. It's just how it is. I didn't make them. I didn't choose them. They just became really famous. It wasn't my fault. But there's your disclaimer for that. You're going to see naked people. You're going to have to be okay with it. So Art is Delight basically once again has to do all about beauty. Definitions of beauty vary quite a bit. But the idea for Art of Delight or Art for Delight, it should be pleasing to the eye or enjoyable to look at. In order to create something that is pleasing or pleasant, there should be thoughtful execution as far as the composition. They would use more harmonious colors and a more harmonious or balanced layout when they're developing their paintings or sculptures. We're going to be talking quite a bit tomorrow about compositions, since that is the topic of tomorrow, particularly lines and colors and shapes and the importance of them. But today, I guess here's a little introduction. There are certain colors that work really, really well together and complement each other. And our next example for Art of Delight is one such artwork. It might be very simple, but it does use colors that are complementary towards each other. Actually, no, never mind. Let's skip that one. Here's our emergency alert system.
This is a test of the emergency broadcast system. This is only a test. If this had been an actual emergency, you would have received instructions on how to respond to the emergency.
They used to do that at night.
This is a test of the emergency broadcast system. This is only a test.
Anyways, Orozco's picture that we're about to look at does use the colors green and red, which complement each other and work very well together. They're also the colors of the Mexican flag. Of course, it's an extraordinarily recognizable subject matter. He's just using a chessboard with lines and beers on top. So very simple. However, it falls under that Art for Delight category because of the color scheme that he chose to use. Thank you. Oh my God. Okay. Another example of Art for Delight that I kind of skipped over, patterns and symmetry also tends to be very pleasing for people to look at. Some people enjoy the idea of a repetitive pattern. Some people really, really like symmetry. I had a student a couple years ago that had OCD. So he really, really liked it when we looked at artworks that were extraordinarily symmetrical. I get it. Symmetry can be very pleasing as well as patterns. Sometimes monochromatic paintings, such as this one, this is John Whistler's Nocturne Blue and Gold, people really enjoy. So for this particular painting, like I said, it's monochromatic. Monochromatic just means it's using all of the same color tonality. So this is all done with blues and grays, except for the yellow firework that's in the background. For this one, Whistler, for the first time in his life, saw a firework. And he wanted to try and capture the beauty of that firework in a painting. Another Orozco here, La Diez. For this one, he cut apart a car and put it back together. pretty symmetrical except for the mirror.
Nothing.
No, he really did cut apart a car and put it back together.
Well, it's like a photo of it.
That's a photo of the car that he made, yeah. The car is the sculpture.
I think you just put the left and right together and the left out the middle.
Yeah, he just cut out the middle. Other people might like something like this to look at. This is a case of Goons dancing in electric blue. This is made of beads and wire, and it's suspended from the ceiling, and of course it reacts to the air around it and kind of spins around like a ballerina. So some people really like this, some people really like this. They all fall under that category of art for delight, or art that's just meant to be enjoyed, to be looked at. There's no deeper meaning beyond it. So what we're going to do as we progress today, I'm going to try and get a different color. We're going to be summarizing each of these categories and writing one example as far as an art piece for each category. So to start off with, who can help me summarize art as delight? Good. And what is an example? Please don't use the one on the screen. That's too. Uh-huh. It's okay, I don't remember how to spell these tablets, so we'll go with the English version of that. And that takes us into our second category, art as commentary. It sounds like it's harder than the last one, but it's not. It's just, so let's say you read a story in the newspaper about a murder that took place, and then you painted what you imagined the scene looked like. What art is commentary is it's an illustration of an event that either the artists themselves witnessed in person or they read about. So it's basically storytelling. Sometimes it can be something really disastrous that the artist is trying to educate the public on, such as Goya's The Disasters of War series. Sometimes it's not quite so complex. We'll get to an example of that after we look at Goya's. For the Disasters of War series, Goya himself was a Spanish citizen while Napoleon's forces were occupying and trying to conquer Spain. So Goya experienced and witnessed Napoleon's invasion of the country, and he made 82 prints illustrating what he experienced. Goya chose to make prints so that it could be mass produced and easily distributed, versus a painting in which there's only a single item. Paintings tend to hold more value than prints just because of the idea of supply and demand. If you make a whole bunch of copies of something, it's probably going to go down in value. But in this particular aspect, Goya was not concerned about valuation. He was more interested in education and the dissemination of information. Here's one print from that series titled I Saw This. A wonderful example of art as commentary. The title itself really exemplifies that. Art as commentary is all about illustrating what you experienced. The title, I Saw This. So this is a scene that he witnessed during the invasions. Later on, Goya ends this series with a large-scale painting, made quite a bit of time afterwards. It is Goya's the 3rd of May, 1808. It was actually painted in 1814. The event itself, however, took place in 1808. We're going to talk a little bit about this one because it's going to come up again tomorrow too. So we'll introduce you to it a little bit today. But for this painting, you see over here, troops lined up with guns, and they are clearly firing at unarmed people. This was a scene that Goya witnessed in the middle of the night, the 3rd of May, 1808, in which Napoleon's forces drug people out of their homes and shot them on the streets. People were suspected of trying to come up with a plan to take back their city. So Napoleon ordered his troops to go in and try to squash that rebellion, which is what we see taking place there. Of course, all of these people are unarmed versus Napoleon's troops that are armed. Napoleon's troops are all in a dark tone. The guns themselves lead our eye over here to the main scene that Goya is wanting us to witness. Any ideas as to what is the main focal point of this painting? The guy in the white shirt. Good job. It doesn't take a whole lot of knowledge of art to figure that out. No, right? It's pretty easy.
Protest?
He is protesting. But what's happening here is Goya used white and a light color as well as light shining down from like an imaginary spotlight to spotlight this man. Those are different techniques that we're going to be talking about tomorrow. White itself tends to stand out to us versus black, which recedes back into space, which is why his men kind of look like they're disappearing into the background over here because they're a lot darker versus this fellow who's in white. His hands and his posture are actually a form of iconography referencing a specific person. If we see this painting in person, you'll be able to pick out who it is referencing a little bit easier. You can't really see it in a photograph or online, but that man's hands have something called stigmata on them. Stigmata is a very fancy Italian word, which means the holes in the hand, specifically the holes in the hand from being removed from a cross. So who exactly do you think that man is supposed to symbolize? Jesus Christ, yes. So his posture, his hands all reference that. That's because Goya is trying to tell the viewers that all of these people were innocent lambs that were being led to slaughter by Napoleon's troops. They did not deserve this. They were crucified for no reason. So he's trying to make a commentary on the subject, but he's also trying to do something else. Any guesses as to what else he might be trying to do? Persuade. Yeah, he's trying to persuade people to think a specific thing about Napoleon and his forces. Very good. So that's a great example of something that can fall under multiple categories. This particular print also would fall under that art as persuasion, as well as art as commentary. This, however, not as complex. This is Gustave Courbet's A Burial at Ornans. What do you think's happening here? Huh? Someone getting married?
No, it's a burial.
Buried. Someone died. This is a funeral. Particularly, it is Gustave Courbet's uncle's funeral. He went to his uncle's funeral. He went back home and he painted it. So it's an event that he witnessed and experienced himself, and he is now illustrating it, which is why it would fall under that category of art as commentary. This one's not nearly as complex as the last one. A lot of people were really mad though because he did this painting on a really large scale, and that's normally reserved for like historical or religious paintings. This is not. In our last example of art as commentary would also fall under the art as persuasion category. This is Occupy LA mural. This is an example of graffiti art With graffiti art, because it is illegal, oftentimes we don't know who the actual artist is. Sometimes they'll use a pseudonym, but we don't usually know who the actual person is that does it because they don't want to go to jail. For this particular mural, the artist himself was irritated about, some of you probably aren't old enough to know, some of us are old enough to know that in 2009, there was a housing market crash and a lot of people lost their homes. There were a lot of foreclosures happening. And that is exactly what the artist who made this was making a commentary of. He himself experienced and witnessed all of those foreclosures happening as the Federal Reserve Bank took custody of all of those homes. So the bank itself is being personified as a monster that is snatching up all of these homes that people lived in, as well as all this money. He's saying right here that it is a monopoly with the little monopoly man. Which is one of the reasons why it would fall under artist persuasion. He's saying that the bank is a monster and it's a monopoly and our government is horrible, which is why there's a very sad looking flag in the background. So it's commentary on the fact that he himself experienced this. Most people think that this is most likely done by a veteran who lost his home during that particular recession period. Of course, like I said, no one's really for sure, but obviously he's also trying to persuade people into thinking that the government is a monster for doing this. Before we move on to this one, let's go and summarize our art as commentary. These are on your text. Specifically, what is it and what's an example?
Expression of an opinion, the artist fiction.
Kind of. Easy to understand.
Visual,
The visual representation of
culture, and
an experience, yeah, or an event.
oh,
Good. And what is one example of artist commentary?
the disaster.
Good. And that takes us to our third one, which is really easy. It's art made for religious purposes. So art made for worship and ritual. Anything that has to do with religion will fall under this category. Oftentimes, these particular artworks will try to enhance religious experiences or religious contemplation. A great example of an artwork that falls under this category is Michelangelo's Pietà, which is a very, very large marble statue made during the Renaissance period. Pietà translates to pity. This is another example of iconography. Any guesses as to who those two people are?
Peter and Mary.
Not Peter.
It's Mary.
Yes, Mary and Christ. Yes. So Christ, right after he's been taken off of the cross. The interesting thing about this, which is a side note, which I didn't tell the first hour, is Mary's lap, in order to hold him, is extraordinarily large. the way this sculpture was made. Larger than a human's lap would actually be, but that's just a little random fact for you because this is the class of random facts. But here we see Christ, he is dead, just been pulled off the cross. Mary, of course, holding her dead son. This is trying to evoke in the viewer this idea of pity. By the way, this statue itself, Pietas, they were extraordinarily popular during the Renaissance period because the church was trying to get people, this is also around the time period that more religions were popping up besides Catholicism. So the Catholic Church was trying to inspire people to come back to the Catholic Church by creating artworks such as this one that would evoke pity in the viewer and make them contemplate, are they worshiping in the way they should be? Are they being as religious as they should be? That's the whole purpose of these pietas that kept popping up during this period. Another example by Michelangelo is the Sistine Chapel ceiling and the Last Judgment altarpiece. Really, the entire Sistine Chapel itself would fall under this category. On the walls here, we have stories from the New Testament. On the ceiling, figures from the Old Testament. And on the apse or the altar, the Last Judgment, which illustrates Revelations. So the entire building itself is the Bible personified with these people. So pretty easy to understand why it would be religious. Yeah.
Could I go on the commentary as well?
Well, he didn't witness it himself, but he did read about it. So technically, yes. But not like seeing it, but like reading about it. So it could. But he definitely took a lot of artistic license with this as well. We'll be talking about that later on when we cover the Sistine Chapel, because we do have to talk about it quite a bit later on down the road. So obviously the whole piece itself is supposed to inspire religious contemplation, contemplating all of these figures and Bible stories as you look at these paintings. Our next one is not Christian. This is Buddhist. We have Zhang Huan Seeds. Seeds is, I really need to like change the font so we can actually see the color. It used to be legible, but that was a long time ago. So seeds is made of incense ash, charcoal, and resin is used as the binder to hold the charcoal and incense together and keep it stuck to the canvas. But like I said, this is Buddhist. Anyone in here extraordinarily familiar with Buddhism, particularly why incense might be important? It's okay, we're in West Texas. I don't expect it. I don't think I knew about Buddhism until I left West Texas. So in the Buddhist religion, one thing that's very important to them is incense. When you are praying, you will normally light incense, and that incense supposedly carries your prayers up to the heavens, and your thoughts and your wishes to the heavens for them to be answered. Normally, when the incense turns to ash, it will just be tossed into the trash can by the temple. But what Zhang Huan does is he repurposes those ashes and basically uses them like paint. Those ashes represent something. Any guesses as to what they represent? Why do they burn the incense in the first place?
Their prayers.
The prayers, yes. So the ashes themselves represent their prayers. So instead of throwing them in the trash, Zhang Huan repurposed them into a painting that will last for a very, very long time. This painting represents not only people planting, but also the seeds of the prayers, which is why it's given the title of seed. This one is a little bit more complex, probably because we aren't extraordinarily familiar with Buddhism, but that's okay. Here's another Sean Juan. This is Ash head. Obviously, this is the Buddha's head, referencing Buddhism once again. Very interesting artist if you're really into 1990s Chinese art. And of course, we will summarize art and worship before we move on. Anyone willing to try and summarize art as worship?
Enhance is really just,
Yeah.
contemplation.
And anyone have any examples for us?
Picture Jesus.
Yes, that is a beautiful stained glass window which illustrates the family history of Jesus. That one is from your book. And that takes us to our fourth one, art for commemoration. We are halfway there, which is good news, probably for people that don't like to sit and take notes. So art for commemoration is art made in remembrance of someone or something. Art made as a memory or to aid memory. Sometimes it's to celebrate a event or a person, such as the World War II memorial raising of the flag at Iwo Jima. That one celebrates those heroes. It is a memory of all of the heroes that fought and died in World War II. Sometimes it's as simple as just being a connection to a dead family member, like a tombstone or a headstone. So all art for commemoration is it's an art piece made in memory of someone or something. And we've already talked about one very, very large architectural piece that was created to remember someone. Does anyone remember what it is? Taj Mahal, yeah. That's actually our first example. The Taj Mahal, like I said earlier, was made in commemoration of Shah Jahan's favorite wife. He had a few wives. This just happens to be the one that gave him the most kids. And she died in childbirth. This is supposed to be representative of paradise, like I mentioned earlier. It's also a testament of his love for her and his devotion to her. And like I said, he was later buried with her there. Not with his other wives, that one. You can Google it. I meant to Google it in the first hour, but I thought we were running out of time and then we weren't. No. No, she was not. It took a really long time to build, and I'll Google the cost too in a second because it's an astronomical number. It's 15 years to build. The cost to build it today would be almost $1 billion. Yeah. So it is insane. And yes, I have to Google things. I can't remember numbers.
That's okay. Didn't he have like 11 wives?
Yeah, he had a bunch of wives. So not even just like a couple.
At the same time, or just one after the other?
At the same time. Yeah, we're talking about a particular time period in which they had many wives at one time. So yeah, she just happened to be his favorite. Lucky her. Yeah. Of course, like I said, paradise, we have the reflective pool, which reflects the building itself. There are gardens that lead up to it, and the entire thing is covered on the exterior and interior with very precious materials. It's pretty impressive. And I'm not going to go any more into detail with it because this is an option for your group presentations later. You can present over the Taj Mahal. Keep that in mind. Our other example of art for commemoration is the death of General Wolfe. This one is quite a bit different than like being a memorial or a tomb. This is a painting that was done for commemoration or in memory of the Battle of Quebec. The Battle of Quebec was the final and decisive battle of the French and Indian War. Anyone know who fought who in the French and Indian War? Here's a hint, it was not the French versus the Indians.
Who fought the war?
Who fought who?
Oh. The French fought. I mean, no one fought. I mean, just painting.
I ask this every time. Okay, I didn't mention at all, but my very first job was teaching 8th grade US history. And this is on the STAR test. So I like pounded it into their heads. But the French and Indian War was a battle between the British and the French, and they were fighting over land in the Americas. Particularly who controlled what. The King of England at the time wanted to expand the territory so that he could make more money off of them. But the French owned that territory and they weren't about to give it up. The Battle of Quebec happened to be the final battle of the French and Indian War, in which the French surrendered after being surrounded by the British forces. The British were only able to surround the French because of colonists and Native Americans helping them find secret trails to sneak around. This particular painting illustrates the death of General Wolfe, who was the leader in charge of that particular event on the British side. Wolfe did die at the Battle of Quebec. So this celebrates not only his death, but also the victory of that particular battle. So it's done in memory of him and in memory of that victory. So it's a little bit different from like the tomb that we just looked at in that sense. And here is that painting there, of course. You don't even have to ask, we're in college, you're good. So Wolfe here is the focal point. Once again, you can pretty much tell because he's really the only one wearing white and he's got a little bit of a spotlight on him. All of the lines also lead to him, as well as people's eyesight lines lead to him. It's pretty easy to pick out. Of course, this is an artistic interpretation. This could also technically fall under art as commentary because West read about the events afterwards and then illustrated it. But in the actual battle, Wolfe's captains and commanders wouldn't stop fighting to go and like hold him while he's dying. They would be busy commanding their own forces. But in this artistic interpretation, he is surrounded by all of his closest friends and his other commanders, which isn't what happened. But that celebrates him a little bit more. And of course, the artist added in a colonist to remind people that the colonists helped win this battle, as well as a Native American to also reiterate the fact that a Native American helped win the battle. Eventually, this leads to an increase in taxes in the Americas and the American Revolution. But yeah, another thing. Another example of art for commemoration is the Vietnam Veterans War Memorial by Maya Lin. This is actually the second Vietnam Veterans War Memorial. The first one is almost like a knockoff of the raising of the flag at Iwo Jima. The Vietnam veterans were not okay with that because it was almost the same thing. So they petitioned to have a second memorial made, and they had a call for artists. And Maya Lin's art piece was selected. A lot of people were not happy that Maya Lin was selected because she was not white and she was not male. Most artists to this time period would have been a man, and specifically a white man. Specifically because it was a Vietnam War memorial. People weren't happy that she was obviously not a Caucasian. And another thing that made people very mad was the fact she was 21. She was 21 when she came up with this idea. It was her very first art piece. She was in college at the time. So it's a very powerful memorial and a lot different from all of the other war memorials that exist in America. It's very somber. How they created it is they dug out a little section directly across from the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C. That's that tall tower. They wanted it to look like there was a large gash in the earth to represent the loss of life and the devastation that was the Vietnam War. It was not a popular war in America at all. And they used then very highly polished black granite along the wall. And in chronological order from left to right are listed the names of all of the people that died and disappeared in that war on the American side. When you're reading those names, because it is highly polished granite, your own face is reflected back to you to remind you why those people have died. So like I said, it's a very somber war memorial, but it is done in commemoration of all of those that fought and died in that war. Quite a bit different. This one, which celebrates someone. This one is very much done just in remembrance. And before we move on to art as persuasion, let's sum up commemoration. So what is art for commemoration? Would be a good summary.
Aid to memory.
And what is a great example?
Things in life.
Benjamin. And that takes us to the fifth one, art as persuasion. This one's really easy because we're inundated with it on a daily basis. That's any art that's trying to persuade you to think something, such as commercial advertisements, Instagram ads, political commercials. We're going to be talking about global warming. So yeah, all of those. Anything that's trying to persuade you. Good or bad, positive or negative, however you want to look at it. Telling you the last class that this particular last election, like I don't have TV anymore, I just have Netflix. So I didn't get any of the commercials that they usually have for like, so-and-so is a horrible candidate, don't vote for them. It was kind of nice. I'm assuming they still existed because I don't know why they would stop, but yeah, I hate those things.
Some ads are more like, they're not as direct, and then some are like you said, like,
I know. I don't see the point of those ads because people like,
people already have their money.
well, yeah, that and like the newer generation that they're trying to appeal to doesn't even have regular TV.
Yeah.
But anyways, they'll catch on eventually. But those political ads have lasted and existed for a very long time, even with the Roman Empire. The very first example of art for persuasion that we're going to look at is one that was made for the first Roman emperor, Emperor Augustus. We're going to be looking at Augustus of Prima Porta. This is an example of political propaganda. It was made for the sole purpose of Augustus trying to reassure and reiterate to his citizens that he was a capable leader. When this was made, he was an older man. He did not want his people to know that he was an older man. He was trying to encourage them and make them think that he was still very, very much capable of doing anything to secure the empire and help it expand. So instead of showing himself as an old man, he used the head of a portrait bust that was made from when he was younger, and he attached that portrait bust copy's head to this body. Does this look like he is an old man there? Does he look fragile? No, he looks very strong and capable. His pose is all about command. The armor that he is wearing tells his citizens that he's capable of conquering and fighting in wars still, even though technically he's not. His face has a strong sense to it. There's a little bit of a furrow to it, like he's serious. And then of course down here, this is another example of iconography, that little baby. That's Cupid. Cupid is riding a dolphin. Emperor Augustus claimed that he was related to Cupid. Does anyone know who the mother of Cupid is? Everyone's looking at you, man. I'll just directly. The mother of Cupid is Venus or Aphrodite, and she, of course, is the daughter of Zeus. So Augustus is saying that he is descendant from the gods and goddesses, therefore he himself is also technically a god. Once again, reiterating his power and strength to his people. That's what this whole statue is about. He had a bunch of copies of these made and placed throughout the empire. It is a common technique that has been used since the ancient Egyptian times to try and create a sense of power and authority with the rulers at the time.
It also said that he's calling people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For sure. For sure. So great example of art is persuasion. Another example of art for persuasion, but not so much like political inside of the country as much as political outside of the country, is Louis XIV's Palace of Versailles. The Palace of Versailles was created after Louis XIV demanded that the ruling house of France be moved from Paris to this completely uninhabited place, Versailles. He had an entire city built in Versailles so that he could rule from there. And is anyone familiar with what that palace is like? You can use some adjectives to describe it.
Orange.
Very large. It is extremely large. There are several gardens attached to it throughout and around. These are the town houses and servant quarters that he had built. Of course, the gates, the palace itself, some more gardens in the background. In the interior of the palace, from like on the ceilings, all of the ceilings are decked out in murals. The walls are covered in gold and tapestries and wallpapers. The floors are covered in marble. All of the decorations are gilded in gold and precious stones and precious metals. He wasted no expense on creating an extraordinarily ornate palace in the middle of nowhere. So that when foreign dignitaries came to visit, they thought, wow, this guy must be really rich. Would you want to mess with someone that's really rich? Let's say with a war. No, he was telling the other countries around him and that visited him that if he's willing to waste a whole bunch of money on building a palace in the middle of nowhere, he's definitely going to be able to spend a lot of money to fight you. So don't mess with France. That was the whole purpose of this palace was to persuade other countries not to pick fights with France. As crazy as that sounds. The palace itself, if you go visit it today, almost everything's a replica. Everything that was originally there was stolen during the French Revolution as people ransacked the palace because they needed money. And of course, more recent examples of art for persuasion. This particular global warming poster for the Third United Nations Convention that was created obviously persuades us what? What's it persuading us to do or think? That we're causing global warming, that global warming is really, really bad and we need to do something to stop it. Yeah, all of those things. That's what this purpose of this poster was trying to do, was to persuade us to think that. This can also technically fall under the category of self-expression though, because this artist was trying to express how he felt about global warming. And I'm saying that because our next category is self-expression and we're about to enter into it. But before we do that, let's summarize art as persuasion.
To influence an action or opinion.
And what's a good example besides that one?
Idealism. Oh, an example of art. Okay.
Or a sculpture?
Idealism.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Good. And that takes us then into our last category, which is self-expression. A good chunk of art that's made today falls under self-expression. In fact, that Occupy LA mural can technically also fall under self-expression because that man was so angry. Almost everything that's made today can fall under this category. Art made for self-expression is literally what it says it is. It's art that's made for the artist to try and express the emotions that he's feeling or exemplify those emotions that he's feeling or she is feeling. Oftentimes, anything that falls under this category will also fall under other categories. So keep that in mind. Some of the things that the artist might be trying to convey are their personality, their feelings, or their viewpoints on things, which is why a lot of times things that fall under self-expression can fall under persuasion.
If we're being tested on, can we, the ones that you say fall under multiple categories, can we write that? Does that count? Okay.
Yeah. And by the way, on tests, you can use examples from the book and in class. You don't have to like find some random thing. That's a good question. I'm glad you asked that. So our example for self-expression is Nussbaum's self-portrait with Jewish identity card. This one falls under a different category as well, and we'll talk about which one in a second. But for this self-portrait, he was trying to express his anxieties and fears being a Jewish person living during World War II. He was terrified. He was expressing that in his painting. And here is that self-portrait there. So you see Nussbaum himself making eye-to-eye contact with the viewer with a very anxious expression on his face. He's holding his Jewish identity card and he's showing his Star of David, which also links him to being a Jew. So this is all expressing his fears and anxieties. Any guesses though to what other category this would fall under? Commentary, very good. So really fast, last thing before we sanitize this. What's a summary for self-expression? Showing emotion. Or thoughts or feelings on a subject, and of course our example would be that self-portrait. Okay, so tomorrow we're going to be talking a lot about how artists create compositions with lines and colors and shapes. Yeah, I don't like tomorrow's class. I don't like talking about what a line is. It's very boring. But, oh well, it's got to be done. Of course, a reminder, if you haven't done your introduction, you need to get that done. It's due on Friday. But everyone, have a great day. Thank you.
Taking us forever. Come on.
Thank you. See you guys.